Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode. The title is From Idol Worship to Ideal Worship to Behavior Worship. What? And so I would like to speak about what I feel has gone on this planet. Really, we are creatures that open our eyes in a realm. We're here for a little while, and the most I find noble and honorable task that we can do is try to open the eyes of the species from whatever eyes we're given. So, in some sense, when we look at history, we find a moment where there was no sympathy. There was no acknowledgement of individualism to even be able to care for another individual. But we have moved past that. And we have to consider that really what's going on is this creature that we are is using stories. We're using stories. Right now I'm speaking to you. I have no choice. It comes into a story format. That means what we have done with knowledge is made it into a journey. But it is a journey for a creature that its attention changes, in the sense that there was this very profound yogi by the name of Shri Ramana Maharshi. He had this quote which was phenomenal. I would tell you, one of the best quotes I've ever heard. He says, let go what goes. Oh, excuse me. He says, let come what comes. Let go what goes. See what remains. That means this was a very simple human being who was like, okay, human being, you have opened your eyes in this world. Things are changing. See what comes to your moment as a creature, as a being that you are. See what comes to your moment, and in some sense, what leaves, what goes. So in other words, watch your world and see what remains. And every day of my life is like a film I'm an actor in, and the next day I get to watch it all over again, you know. Now, I would say this idea I'm saying, ideal worship, from idol worship to ideal worship, I was so proud when I put those two words together, ideal worship. Why? Because it explained what happened after idol worship. Just think about it. There was a time that human beings, upon receiving consciousness and personalizing and even the development of language, we used to worship objects. That means back in the day, you ask someone, hey man, what is truth? They'll be like, yeah, this object in front of me that we're all worshiping, it's like, don't forget to bow. Don't forget to bow to the atoms. We were worshiping the object. And then there's stories of, for example, Abraham, who in some sense, uh, that he pretty much, there's, you can say, a room filled with statues that people are worshiping. And I believe there's the story of Abraham that he comes to, and he sees a bunch of people are worshiping these idols, these statues with sticks, stones, feathers, whatever you want to call it, and all these gods are placed in one room. And so what he does is, when people have gone, when all those people who were worshiping objects, they left the room, I don't know, they went out or something. What Abraham does is that he gets a hammer or something, I don't know, something like a shovel or a hammer or something, and he destroys all the statues in the room, except one, of the statues. All the people who are worshiping the idols and the objects, they come inside and they see all their gods have been broken. Do you know? And they see Abraham is in the room sitting, like standing or whatever, and they see the hammer or whatever on the side of the wall beside one of the statues. Do you see what I mean? So the people are like, Abraham, did you do this? And Abraham's like, no, this one God broke all the other gods. You see the hammers beside him, and they're like, this god doesn't have hands. What are you saying? You did it. And it's in that moment where it's like Abraham's like, why are you worshiping a god that has no hands? You know? It's as if it's, you see that people suddenly saw the hollowness in what was to their inner realms full. So pretty much we were worshiping objects. We're like, oh my God, this is truth, this object. And it was slapped out of our hand. Now, what happened after? We went to idea worship. After objects could no longer be our truth, subjects became our truth. And even until now I'm speaking, ideal worship is the pentacle of knowledge. That is how we're saying we know. That means it's in some sense, the subject has become more real than the object. So it's not enough to just see an object, you know? So, from idol worship to ideal worship, now I feel something else is happening. Something that usually in the talks I've given so far on this channel, I've taken it up to ideal worship. And then I go beyond the language threshold usually, because what is beyond an idea is an experience that we don't have the idea for yet, right? But I noticed today that there was something in between the direct experience and the indirect ideological filling of the gap. So what I mean by that is that we were an object, we weren't an object anymore. Then we were we didn't just be we weren't an object to ourselves. Okay, let me say it again. We worshipped objects. Our attention felt an object was the ultimate. Then our attention felt a subject was an ultimate. Then the attention tends to come to the unknown. Here, honestly, this morning I was drinking coffee outside of a Tim Hortons, and I was just looking at just the world, people. I'm like, what is life doing today? You know? And it was fascinating to me that it's not enough to just be an object. It's not enough to just be a subject being named and just being an idea to yourself. It's what we do with these. So behavior worship is how the object and subject are being maintained. That means now we have found a fascination where I would say, first you can say self-help. Back in the day, it was just like stuff. You would have helped someone if they, in regards to stuff, like they didn't have stuff, you shared the stuff, you know? Now we have come to a point where we're helping through words. And then, right now I would say people are no longer thinking. People are no longer thinking through language. It's behavioral acceptance of victory. That means it's literally like no longer just object subject. It's like how the object is being a subject or how the subject is being an object. We have moved into that time. That means it was, I can tell you, stability for the human being is just to make your senses make sense to you. Oh man. Pretty much this is mysticism. You know, the person's like, how could my senses make sense when they are where the senses come from? You know, that means that our senses are nonsense to us. We can never know what they mean because we need them to have our meaning. We can never know before the senses what it means while we're here in this sector. Says, coveting other people's gifts, using other people to make a buck, killing for money, please stop them. Let me tell you, it's like there's different ways you can prevent things, but sometimes you can never prevent something. Like, let's say somebody is chopping a tree that doesn't even belong to them, a tree that's not even on their property. Imagine someone with an axe is like chopping that tree. you know you can tell them to stop chopping the tree. You can literally go push them, like literally physically make them stop chopping the tree. Or you can ask them, why are you chopping this tree, good sir? And the guy's like, I don't like this tree. And then you ask him, why don't you like this tree? Because I don't know, this tree looked at me in a bad way, And then you're like, yo, it's like, you ask again, sir, how could a tree look at you? Do you see? Eventually you come to a moment where the person's intent for the activity was back into the void. That means technically think as if before you do anything, you're doing nothing, right? So in any moment you do something, the nothing is like the empty piece of paper where your activity is a sentence being written on. The empty page is there. Technically, we are nothing. Doesn't change. Something comes and goes. That means when people they say like I am nothing, it's as if no. You are something. The world is nothing. What I'm trying to say is that I feel this is really a symptom, or not a symptom, a sign of the era of advanced communication. That it's as if we mastered moving as an object. We are now mastering noticing that we're a subject. You know? The next mastery would be to, I would say, I think this is where we're going to go. We're going to go to being attributeless witnessers. Attributeless witnesses of something that never needed classification. So what it means is right now the materialist is an idol worshiper. The immaterialist is an ideal worshiper if the materialist speaks. If the materialist just moves, you can say if just let's say you never were interested from words. Like me personally, like I'll tell you, not all that I have learned in this life was just in words and images. It was how images came about. So I would say sometimes I have learned more from a person's behavior than their how they move as an object or how they move as a subject. Because to be aware of behavior, you have to be witnessing the object and subject from outside of it. If you're not witnessing the subject from outside of it, you're not conscious of your behavior. If you're not witnessing even something beyond the object, there is no choice for consciousness. You see, we have made the grave error in a changing world to generalize a fixed truth. When will we realize energy doesn't stay still? Energy is like, imagine yourself as a child and somewhere where you had to wait. You were very young and you had to wait somewhere, you know? It's as if there was a yearning for something that wanted to go beyond the shape of the moment. And a lot of things that human beings do, I would say in 2020, we're not even looking at what it means. I feel we have come to a time where we just want to, like, our minds when we wake up are like a container, like an empty cup, and we just want to fill it. That means I would say it's a strange time where uh, So, to study behavior, we can say, of course, I'm kind of making it into a sort of, I'm giving it three dimensions, where from just looking at objects, we went to looking at subjects. Now we're looking at how the object and subject move together as a sort of behavior. But behavior worship means the end of linear truth. If we start behaviorally, that means think of it as if there is a body language, and think of it that there is like a mind language. Okay? So our body language is silent, yet it is the main event. That means whatever I consider, I think about, or I fathom, or I notice in my inner realms, at the end of it, I'm left as a body here. That means I could say, yo, I went out of body. I was looking at, Earth from a telescope in the Andromeda Galaxy, a futuristic telescope from the Andromeda Galaxy. But what it is that eventually I will find myself feeling my feet on Earth. That means as long as we have a body, we come to a singular central, and we come to a central point. That central point is a material position. That means some people feel they have bodies. I feel I'm in a position of a body. Literally, like space is looking at itself through matter in a position. Now, let me see if I can give more examples, because really the topic for this episode was inspired based on just me seeing people. Like, there was a person. I tend to smoke, like I smoke cigarettes, like in the morning when I smoke a cigarette, I smoke like outside of a vehicle. Like, I have a vehicle, I smoke outside of it. But there's some people who just smoke at the window of the vehicle, And so it's as if it's all for behavior. All these future generations, and you can say coming of age human being. It's like, it's honestly self-behavioral update. That means you know that you're an object, you know that you're a subject, but you want to experience new combinations. And so once we experience a new combination, I feel there has to be a repetition to it sometimes. Like, think of it this way: you've never held a sword in your hand, and you were, I don't know, somehow time teleported back into, I don't know, the medieval ages or ancient Greece, and you suddenly find yourself with a sword and a shield, and you're just in a battlefield, So it's like you just teleported. You're not a swordsman or something, but what you should do is just for a moment, whatever, let's say back in the day you have a sword or whatever, what it is the weapon in your hand. I shouldn't say weapon, I should say the tool in your hand. It has to be played with a couple times, That means it's like someone who is like, you just throw a basketball at them and they don't play basketball. It's like they shouldn't just right away practice shooting. They should just throw the ball from one hand to another to just get a sense of it, And I feel what the phase we have come to in regards to, I called it behavioral worship, but you can also call it behavioral following. That means it's like we were following just objective position, a static object. Then we were following static subjects, and now let's say we are following dynamic objects, and then we will follow dynamic subjects, Pretty much our psychology in front of our eyes is like a photo, just like a singular photo. Behind our eyes is like a film. So the mind is living a more multidimensional life than the body. Even though in these modern times we can't disconnect the mind. I'm kind of speaking more like as if I'm wearing Rene Descartes' mind-body dualism jersey. Like, One can say behavior is a response to stimulus. So technically, behavioral worship means we're worshiping the environment. It can mean that. It could mean that people actually on this planet are not living lives of their own. They're not living actually a life that is new to them. They're living a life that they're just comfortable with. And I will tell you, comfort in ideology denies your body from seeing itself in new ways. That means if what it means is stop looking at objects only, stop looking at subjects only, and stop looking at only like how an object is a subject or a subject is an object. And eventually, after all worship, one thing is going to happen. The attention worship technically means outer. It means you're seeing something outside of you and your attention is on lockdown, you know? That's technically worship. You're literally where your attention is. You can say there's no such thing as verbs and any sort of verb. There's just attention moving around, okay? There's just attention changing. Imagine your attention was like in the Yoga Patanjali Sutras, they say consciousness is a glass orb. Imagine consciousness is a glass orb moving over colored surfaces. Similarly, it takes the color of the surface it's on, but it is not the surface. So technically, there may be idol worshippers in the world right now. There may be ideal worshippers in the world right now. There may be behavior worshippers in the world right now. But ultimately, attention doesn't have a location. Because if it did, the mind would be an object, and that would destroy how we have raised language from the dirt. That means we have come into a very incredible position where you can neither be pure materialistic, because if you are renouncing your mind. If you become pure immaterialistic, it's not possible because you're renouncing your body. So the most healthiest way of function is that the idea of worship is a singularization of meaning. So I would say the only thing that's worth worshiping is everything. You can worship everything or nothing. Do you know? If you worship nothing, technically you're worshiping the potential for everything. You know? And it's hilarious because people who worship nothing, in the middle of it, they're like, what am I worshiping? What am I worshiping? Seriously. You know? And I honestly feel something about even religion, that the message of religion was missed. That we have so many religious people, yet it's a sort of fear, behave the correct way kind of approach. It's as if it's like, I honestly feel the whole point of religion is to suggest that we can be in communication and symbiosis with the collective being. It's literally a story for a human that is not human. It's the story for humans that is never human. You can say religion is I don't know how religious people feel human. I think it's impossible. I think it's impossible to be religious and human. Why? Because everything is God's will. There's no you. What is you? You know? That means it's this one of these mind-boggling things that I always wondered, like, what is this in the from a theological angle? God is within us, our souls are like from God, yet we have to worship God. Well, that makes no sense. It's like God is worshiping itself just through the image of man. It's not worship. That's where I think love kind of blinded our ability that it's a communication with the unknown. But it's a communication with the unknown, just like you talk to anybody. If you don't trust the person, you don't trust it's as if like they didn't say anything. That means, let's say somebody is trying to help you, and if you don't trust them, even 0.1%, you distrust them, you'll smile, you'll hear everything then you say, then afterwards it's as if like they were never there. We are right now surviving through behavior as a response to the massive void we find ourselves in. Behavior has been like our best strategy. It's like, what do you do when you're temporary? Perform. Pretty much we are the healthiest way to see civilization is that we are conscious manifest performers. Nobody is greater or lesser, we're just performers. Nobody is good or bad, we're just performers. It's all a performance of nature, yet this performance of nature has found a way to create another performance, a world in a world, and we're judging the whole world based on the world inside the world that is us, you know? So technically, the brain can't tell if it's in charge or the universe. It's as if like on if we were to look at ourselves as a creature of mind, as a mind, it's as if you are made of language. That means it's like the purpose of life is a specific sentence. It's strange. Sometimes I feel like the soul is a writer, you know? The soul is a writer, the mind is like the alphabet, this, you know, like the words, the vocabulary. And the body is just the ink on the page. So technically it means the purpose of a mind is to move the body as language. The purpose of the body is to move the mind as silence. You know, says Mr.Within, does time stand still on or in the moon? No man's land. In dreams I saw the ancient of days in Saturn system. Edgar Casey reader says my last lifetime was there. You know, you probably know who Edgar Casey is, but Edgar Casey is a very unique, I would say, advanced communicator. That means he was providing for the human being, for our species, an example of a very unique type of communication, where Edgar Casey would pretty much go sleep. He would lie down on a bed, and he would, in some sense, activate a voice. And so it was as if he was voicing the dimensions beyond his senses through a semi-sleep state. It's just phenomenal. It's just we're like a bunch of people in a dark forest with flashlights. That's it. We're just exploring uncharted territory. That's all of knowledge. That means if you have moved have been moved by the scholarly winds, you have to honor the unknown and the known. Because the moment you don't honor one of them, in some sense, you get sucked in by the other. That means if you're someone who are like, okay, you know, everything is known, the unknown doesn't exist, you know, then you will feel in charge of of the universe, you know. So you will be left in your known room. And let's say you're someone who says, no, man, everything is unknown. I tend to be on the edge of the unknown usually when I speak. To be fully unknown means to no longer be human. That means I will tell you meditation, yoga, mysticism, nirvana, moksha, enlightenment, these are paths to notice how you were never human, but you were not a shape. You can say mysticism is that very rare classroom and branch of the tree of knowledge where it's wondering about the roots in the invisible, in the soil that we cannot see. That means for me, imagine like human beings are a tree, our roots are in the unobservable universe. And the observable universe is limited to how well we're moving around objects and subjects and believing it. It's a very incredible time because I feel there's a silent coming. I feel there's a silent apocalypse coming. And this silent apocalypse will arise when the transference between the inner realms of people become instantaneous. That means if right now what I was thinking was instantaneously in your mind without me saying it, it makes speech obsolete. So you can say it's like an evolution of an individual object, material individual object, towards an immaterial collective subject. That means beyond behavior worship, there is collective living. There is no identity. This is the last, I would say, stage of the psyche. To behave, to be conscious that it is behaving, that the object and subject move. Pretty much we are an object, and like pretty much everybody can check for themselves. Like in any moment you're existing, you look at it and you're like, all right, I see my body, first person point of view from my eyes, I'm an object. And then you ask yourself, who is seeing this body though? And then you close your eyes and you notice there is still awareness. So consciousness, when you close your eyes in a unique way, and let's say if the senses could be closed or made very still, consciousness becomes awareness when there is no conditional uh, rule to the system. Now, I use the term behavior worship, but what would that mean? That would mean, let's say it was just we saw a bunch of objects, sticks and stones. We were like, yeah, that's truth. I know I'm repeating, guys, but trust me, there's more views to this. Every idea has hidden angles. We could only move beyond idol worship because we realize we're not just idols, we're not objects. We can only move beyond idea worship when we realize we're not just subjects. We can move behind behavior worship when we realize we're not just the movement of objects and subjects. So it would be a still collectivity. I would tell you that there has been no civilization that has died, that has been destroyed. Maybe in the outer realms it has. In the inner realms, this planet has an archive. That means, think of it this way: energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can just change from one form to another, right? And when we see an event on Earth take place, that's an energetic transformation. It's like energy in one form is going into another form. So technically it means energy, because it can't be created or destroyed, it's always there. That means what is causing the temporary is eternal. The energy is an eternal cause of temporary form, changing form. And really, people have access to an objective life. We don't need proof that we are bodies. Technically, we don't need proof for an instantaneous awareness either. That's instant. It's as if like the mind and body are a couple and they walk into the room, into the party, like at the same time. Right now we are creatures fighting over objects. And also creatures fighting over subjects. The next thing that our attention has gone is behavior. Beyond behavior, there is no individual selfhood. So you can say, right now we're worshiping individual behavior. Then to worship collective behavior is not possible. It's just experiential. You know, it's like you're alive once, dare to see the most advanced version of yourself. I would say that is the ultimate teaching for attention. Even if you were a Buddhist and let's say a yogi and you entertain the idea of reincarnation and being a sort of transmigratory soul, and even entertaining the idea that you're gonna go live lifetimes with a similar pattern, or there's some I would say in the mystical experience, some may feel that they have been living their lifetime endlessly. You see, it's as if like a pattern. Imagine somebody has just been pressing the A key on the keyboard. Okay, now let's say your next lifetime you go to the S key on your keyboard, right? And let's say you want to write the word ask, okay? And you write ASK, and so it's in some sense the A suddenly is familiar to you. So what it is we can think that we're an individual journeying through different landscapes, different lifetimes, or we can feel that we're actually a mind and every lifetime is like a thought. It's an emergent thought. If you fear your mind, you will never know what it is. If you fear your biological existence, you won't use it. And if you fear how your eyes were here before you were, I will tell you to wonder about your eyes before they were here. That is one thing that I will tell you the ancestors of anybody in any lineage is just waiting for. Imagine like there is a hall. Back in the day, your ancestors, they were alive, but they were alive in the spirit realm, you know? So that means there was no concept of death. There was just the concept of transition. But the presence of the soul was in some sense non-local, so that means that it's like a fragment. That that means it's like your mind is not an object. So when it reverts back to a state when it was never an object, it will experience simultaneous locality. That simultaneous locality is still like climbing the tree but not reaching the top. And it's not the assurance. It's this idea that some people have, that after a person, in certain metaphysical circles, you can say, esoteric circles, they have this idea that when a person dies or transitions, they in some sense are greeted by light, a family of light. This family of light in certain mystical circles was seen as an illusion. That means if you follow the family of light, afterwards you reincarnate. But if you have realized something more than the individual relationship in the lifetime, your aftermath is not individual. So technically, if you think you're a person as long as time is real, When time is no longer real, and when I say time is not real, that means the psychology is not dependent on the outer realm change. Pretty much, there's this idea, pretty much, the yogis had it. Life is a dream, it's a simulation. If you keep dreaming in it, you will be in the dream. If you want to awaken from the dream, and awakening tends to mean completely leaving that room of existence. You wake up. The world is not the same. So pretty much you change yourself in a world until you get tired of being a self in that world, and then you change the world. You change yourself as a world. So think of it in this side of the coin, right now where we're alive, in this manifest reality. This side of the coin is just living as a question, as a self in a world. The other side is a world in a self. So on this side, we're practicing being a self in a world. On the other side, you're going to be the world of selves. What does that mean? Pretty much, on this side, we're a body in a mind. On that side, we're a mind in a body. That means the body is in the mind. Right now, the mind is in the body, in this side of the coin. There is this view that dishonesty arises when you don't have the courage to be honest, because of what it would imply. And so all worship is dishonesty. And it's this strange view where even let's say I was raised in a, I could say in my childhood, religion was around. So I came to realize that it is this strange thing that it's as if God's creation is perfect, yet people feel they have to do something about it. You know? So I don't know, it's a very multidimensional thing. The world is becoming more and more multidimensional, and we are stuck in words and objects, subjects and objects. So I think most human beings, the purpose of life will be just to see how you're more than an object and more than a subject. And if you do this, I will tell you the future generations are already saluting you, because it is the greatest thing that could be done. That means if you think about it, we can just move as a body, or we can move in our inner realms as attention. So you have pretty much two options as a creature, as a manifest creature, as a conscious manifest creature, to make physical movements, or to in some sense make subjective movements, object-based movements and subject-based movements. Now those type of civilization we have built, Civilization 1.0, the current show, it is grounding itself in being an object, and it's simply because we don't know matter. If we truly knew what matter was, we would have the confidence to wonder about the immaterial. But because we don't know what matter is, there's this view even that 99.9% of the atom is empty. It's such a strange world we're in that sometimes it even feels like a video game. I honestly feel the video game is the best analogy, best modern analogy. It's a video game is modern cyberspace, is modern spirituality, pretty much. Is secular spirituality. In front of your eyes, like a video game, let's say a multiplayer online video game, all the players from outside of the video game log in. They log in to an account. They log into an account, and from that account, they become a character in a map. So what does that mean? That means when a person's playing this, let's say an online multiplayer online video game, everybody is a character on that map. This is, in a mystical sense, in front of our eyes, we're all in the same physical map, same physical virtual map. Okay? But behind our eyes, we're like that person playing the video game that has nothing to do with the character. That means the character in the video game is made of pixels. You are not made of pixels. Yet you are moving and being the mind of that character in that video game, that pixelated character. So now imagine that pixelated character had become conscious and had no clue that you were playing. And this pixelated character suddenly realized, oh my God, I'm someone behind the screen being played. Literally, all mysticism is saying that. Is saying that beyond the screen of your mind, there's an unknown witness. So it can't be anything in the video game. Truth can't be the video game. Truth is moving the video game, but truth is not in the video game. And what's even cool is that idea of reincarnation, what happens when a character in a video game dies? The character respawns until it completes the level. Or the quest or whatever. So it's like you as a being decided to play a game, as a multidimensional being, decided to play a game, let's say a video game, a virtual video game in a singular dimension. Now you have forgotten you're multidimensional. But it's not that you have forgotten, it's just that the way the characters in the pixel have no way of talking about beyond the screen. The only thing they can say is that the video game was paused for a moment. You know, it's like meditation is like pausing the video game and the person behind the screen suddenly taking a breath, taking a fresh, like, okay, let me relax, you know. So that's what I'm saying. We are a known, non-local, technically rendering us multidimensional, locational experiencer. So what does that mean? Mind is space. Body is matter. Mind was here before body. So matter has no other choice than to consider itself as a mind. So it could be that to think consciousness or starts from the brain, it could be a grave error. Could be an incredibly big error of complete misinterpretation. That means we're saying like, okay, there was nothing here, then a brain emerged, then the emergence of this brain allowed a psychology to emerge, and then this emergent psychology that wonders about itself just sees it's the brain emerging, but it doesn't experience the brain. It's like nobody knows what it feels like to be a brain. There is no reference point. So we are all acting in the void, which technically means that the singular dimension is sandwiched. Matter is sandwiched between a known dimension is sandwiched between unknown dimensions, and the unknown dimensions are sandwiched between known dimensions. So imagine the two pieces of bread being the unknown and what's in the sandwich being the known, and imagine the two pieces of bread being the known and what's in the sandwich unknown. Some people listening to this, they're like, did Mr.Within just say sandwich? We care for the world, but we actually, I feel we care more for what happens. It's like we're watching a movie not for the sake of seeing what the movie is about. We're seeing the movie to see what we like from it. You know, it's like in dating or something. Like where if you want the outer realms to be exactly matching your inner realms, you'll never get to know anyone, because nobody is perfect enough. Nobody is good enough for you. So that's the thing, where there has to be a sort of pause on the video game of the psyche, and even the video game of the outer realms to some degree. Like, I will tell you, like, that character actually dies in the video game. Death is real to the video game character, but to the person playing the character is not real. And so we have built a civilization on the psyche of pixelated characters rather than on the view of the person behind the screen of form in a changing world. So I am telling you, wisdom will in the future mean to smile before you need to. It's like, imagine being a young kid and being introduced to religious ideology and being like, oh my God, am I being God right now? Is everything being God right now? I remember saying this like funny story in one of the talks where I'm like, this person suddenly finds an audience with the divine, like God. The God comes to the person, and the person's like, God, why did you create all of this? Like, why did you do this? And God looks at the person and says, none of your business. And technically, that is, I would say, a poetic ultimatum. We are accepting the alphabet, then accepting the words and their meanings, then speaking. And so for psychology is like, first we're being an image of a self, then we are having images of the world and what that means, and then we're moving as a self in the world. In my inner realms, I will tell you, the most on this planet, there's a lot of ideas. Now, the way the educational system is working is that it's pointing to the child where to look, to the student, to the novice. It's pointing where to look. But after a while of looking in this world, you'll realize you're here to see things. Now, how you see things is another issue. But ultimately, you are here as a mind to perceive. That means the purpose of the mind is to see what's going on. I can't see any other purpose to it. It's just to be. It's self-awareness is like why this universe has a mind. And self-awareness means there is something, and more of it is being noticed. That's really what it is. We're just becoming more and more every day. More experiences. Literally like a camera. Imagine a camera. Every day you wake up, you record. Every day you wake up, you record. This is all being stored. But it's not being stored consciously like a computer. It's just being put like gas into a room. Or like I don't know, gas into a balloon. Do you know? So I will tell you, we are recording sensory perception in a strange way where it's filling up the sense of self, the ideological, the person, the creature's principle, universal philosophy, but it is not. It doesn't have order. So you can say the brain has no reason to process your senses unless you want to move. Like, what reason does it have? That means if you don't care about this world, why should you ask even if there's something more beyond it? Do you know? It's so easy not to care about transcendence, but it's just the ultimate. The ultimate means the cup gets filled to the brim, the cup of knowledge gets filled to the brim, and that extra water, let's say, or tea or whatever pouring out from the cup, that is the unknown. That's literally unknown experience. Because to really be a spiritual being means you were never in matter. So technically means you can't be a creature. Spirituality is the end of creaturehood. And mysticism is when the host of your psyche's game reveals itself from within. That means we are waiting. We are waiting for the greater eyes of mankind. And it's one of those endless till the end of time waiting situations. And so I feel there's this strategy. I have this very intelligent atheist uncle. And an atheist uncle who has comfortably slammed down so many of my views. Like a wrestler, dude. But I will tell you, he said something very powerful once. He told me, which had nothing to do with theology or whatever. He said, anytime you're in an emergency, take a step back. Take a step back, look at the situation, then activate, then act. And I can tell you that is one of those life hacks, one of those life algorithms that in any situation in your life, anything that happens, you can take a step back, then properly look at the situation, then engage. Now we have to do this on a psychological level. And that's where mysticism is not for the faint of heart, but it is for those who want to find their heart of hearts. Mystics, a quick definition, a short definition of mysticism is the lover of the unknown. Because after you've loved what you know, it's like the unknown's left, That means it's like really, if two people knew everything about each other, they would have no reason to know each other anymore. Guys, I wrote a sentence in the chat section. I wrote, if I feel if you are suffering, it's because you're identifying with what you are not. Sometimes when a multidimensional being doesn't have the maturity to let emptiness be emptiness and let the unknown be unknown, they identify their life force with what that force is moving. Sorry guys, I'm okay. What can I say, guys? We're all in the unknown. We're all knowing things in accordance to what we consider as unknown. It's like we're experience tunneling, and we're just giving a certain experience language, and when we have another experience, technically we're left with no choice. We tunnel through. I can tell you I have ran 28 laps around the sun to realize that we have been spinning around ourselves from the beginning. We have been spinning around the source of our sight from the beginning. And it's like remarkable poetry. It's as if sometimes when you look at, you know what it is, when I look at the solar system, I feel like there's invisible gears. It's like we can't see it, but like, you know, just playfully, I just entertain, you know, like as if it's like a machine where the gears are invisible, but the machine is working, you know. In certain traditions, they would call the sun the lantern in the sky. Who is holding that lantern in the sky was like the question of why is the sun in the sky? Why is the sun in our eyes right now? Why has light journeyed so far into to be us? Isn't that fascinating? Light is being us right now. That every person who's had a friend or an enemy or whatever kind of archetypal classification, it's all been light. And it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling that what we are responding to is sight. We are sight incarnate. And you know, the word insight is literally insight. So when you notice where your sight is in, that's a sort of insight. You know? Or when you notice what is in your sight, you know, that's an insightful moment. And so it's honestly like trying to find Thor's hammer. Like, Imagine Thor was your friend and you borrow the hammer and you're just using Thor's hammer to break the walls of a simulation made from movement and noise, from sound and movement. So what it means is man has two options. Either you use a known way to get to a new knowledge, or you use an unknown way. That means I'll tell you like that right now. Let's say I want to levitate this cup in front of me on a table, this Tim Hortons cup in front of me. Let's say all right, I want to levitate this. I would think about in my inner realms, for example, like, all right, the cup is gonna move in the air. Let's say it's gonna levitate, like, I don't know, 50 centimeters above the air. Okay. So this cup, technically, if I wanted to levitate 50 centimeters above the air, its final destination, its Aristotelian final cause, would be to just be 50 centimeters above the air. So when I can't levitate the object. I'm not a Jedi like in Star Wars. It's like, not yet, but there's hope. But I'll tell you, it's like, if I lift this cup 50 centimeters in the air, I have literally got the same outcome as I would levitate it. I would have the same certainty as if I had levitated it. So that what I'm saying is, it doesn't matter if you use your hand to raise the cup 50 centimeters in the air and hold it there, or if you levitate the cup 50 centimeters in the air and hold it there. The destination of the meaning of that whole action is just cup 50 centimeter above the air. So it doesn't matter. You can use an unknown way to get to a new known view, or you can use a known way. You know, that means pretty much there's no such thing as, I would say, believers and disbelievers. That's a game. Both sides, they're playing games with themselves. You know, what it is just people who have boxes on their head and people who don't. That's it. There's no good or bad people. There has never been a cruel or a compassionate person. There has just been people who have identified with what they have been doing, or as the form. That means they have been identifying with a character in a story. So as long as we identify as a character in the story, as long as names are us, we are idea worshippers. This is why it's like personality is important, because personality means, what is that mind doing when there is no other outer realm influence? So your personality is how you are a person to yourself, or I would say who you are as a human being. The best way you can tell your, let's say, standard, like your nature, is when you are a place where you have, like a knight, dropped your armor. So I would say, in a hilarious way, people are their most honest when they're taking a shower. You know, or when they're doing something that it's in their own space. Do you know? It's in the privacy of their own mind. Do you know? So I would tell you that a person who sings underneath the shower, that's like, that is like who they really are. You know? There was a sage, this person, let's say, back in the day. He went to the forest and sat down because he felt life deserved to be looked at naturally. And he sat there, and eventually the desires fell away one by one. as if the mind had no longer an agenda in the void. And so the person eventually noticed how nature was at peace. It was man who was in pieces. And what happens in the story is that this person one day opens his eyes and he sees there's 500 disciples. And it's as if the individual understood itself as a collective, therefore the collective took shape. That means people don't realize it, but teamwork is like how a universe moves. Or how universes move alongside each other. You know? This sage looks at the 500 disciples, and there is one of the disciples who was the first disciple, actually. Let me actually reformat the story. So this guy has 500 disciples. One of the disciples, which we can say he had come earlier, or whatever, let's not even change this. So the 500 disciples are there. One of the disciples is smiling. He's this strange guy. All the other disciples like, what's wrong with this guy? You know, and this guy, whatever situation he's in, he just has a smile. And it's just like this like smile of like the happiness of the overwatcher, you know? And he's just watching the moment and smiling, you know? And none of the disciples know why this guy's smiling. Only the sage, only the first person, the person who suddenly opened his eyes and saw the 500 disciples, only he knows why this one disciple is smiling. Winter comes. They are invited by the king of the land to go into the kingdom during winter, and the king's like, okay, these guys are cool, you know, definitely we gotta help them, like, you know. And the king in this story, if you could see literally like a film, literally the scene going to a different character, it would be literally the king was the whole story, this side of the story. The monks go into the kingdom invited to the king, invited by the king, but why did the king invite them? The king was suffering. The king realized he would wake up in the morning and he was king and he had the best quality, best service and all this, you know. But he would go into suddenly like a council and he would have people where he wouldn't trust. He didn't know who he should trust in running a kingdom, you know. And then he would, for example, go, kings had multiple wives back in the day, so he would then have the hassle of like which wife wanted to, which queen wanted to, like in some sense, which wife wanted to forward their prince, right? And so he had that hassle, and pretty much it was a guy who was being a king, but he was suffering. You know, he was a king. He was a big dog, but he was suffering. And so he sees these sages in the forest who have this strange inner peace, and he's like, okay, let these guys come by, let me see what's going on, you know. Now what happens is the king is so busy that he doesn't get the time, and it's like winter is almost over, and the sage is getting ready to go with the disciples, and the sages see him as an older person, you know, like a senior. He's become a senior person, you know, senior citizen. And so and so the king comes, and the king sees that the sage is going back, and he hasn't had a chance to speak with the sage, and he just looks at the sage and he says, send your disciples into the forest. You have become old, and I'm a king, and serve your kingdom and help the king. You're a wise man, be my counsel. And the old man, he's pretty old. Okay, not like that old, but but the sage is like, okay, yeah, this makes sense, you know. The sage goes to the disciples and he's like, he goes to the smiling disciple, you know, that he only knew why he was smiling, and he says, take the rest of the people back and continue your path on cultivating inner peace. That means literally for a sage, the most important thing is be peaceful. Because if there isn't a peaceful moment, the great insights are shy. They only, like, think of genius. The genius of the future generations is shy. It needs peacefulness to trust the moment to step out. That means the moment we become peaceful, the cosmos is going to gift us endless insights. That means imagine the moment there's world peace, endless gifts. I am telling you, a peaceful mind sees the world before it is in pieces. So anyways, the sage sends the smiling disciple and the 500 disciples, the other disciples, to go back to the forest, and he stays with the king. And so what happens is years pass by, and this king starts actually being more self-conscious, being self-aware, and making better decisions. That means the king became more compassionate. When he became compassionate, in some sense, the people actually cared more for the kingdom. Trust me, guys, in history, there has been enlightened kings. Usually in history books, you see kings that have failed. You see the weak kings. There's examples of enlightened kings. That means they didn't feel they were a king. They felt they were the whole kingdom. That's totally different. That means the crown is on the head of humanity, not a human. Anyways, so years pass by, and the disciples in the forest, their inner peace increases. They're becoming more and more peaceful as the years go by, right? And so one day the smiling disciple comes back to the kingdom and sees the sage, that has become the counsel of the king. And they're sitting in a room, and the smiling disciple is sitting in front of a sage, and a sage, the guru's become like someone old, like an old person, And he just looks at the smiling disciple, looks at the sage, and he just sees he's become an old man, and he's talking, and he says, "Oh, what happiness! Oh, what happiness!" That means he's just sitting there, and he's like, "Oh, what happiness!" He's just being cheerful around this being. The king walks into the room. The king walks into the room, and he sees something strange. Of course, the sage is an old man, so the king doesn't expect the sage to show respect or something. The sage is there, of course. The sage is polite, but I'm saying the smiling disciple doesn't get up. So this king walks into a room, and like literally imagine like an alien walks into the room, and it's like a human being doesn't react. Like, the alien comes in the room, and we're like, okay, are you lost? What do you want? But no, if I could come back to the atmosphere of the story, the king comes in, and he just sees the smiling disciples is just looking at the sage and saying, "Oh, what happiness! Oh, what happiness!" And the king's ego, he gets offended. He's like, "This guy doesn't realize I'm the king. I'm the king. He's in my palace. He doesn't realize whose palace he's in. He doesn't show respect to the king." And so he comes to the older sage, and he says to the older sage, "It seems your disciple has been just sitting around doing nothing and so lazy without any discipline that your disciple has become a fool, and he's just saying, 'Oh, what happiness, oh, what happiness,' without doing anything." And in the middle of the king saying this, like his ego kind of stepping out into the outer realms, the sage instantly says, hey, looks at the king and says, "Dear king, hold your words." And the king's just looking at the sage like, "Why?" It's like, do you know I'm a king, And this is where the whole mystery of why that disciple was smiling gets revealed. Where the sage says, "King, this smiling disciple in front of you, he used to be a person who was escorted by armored guards. He used to be a person who had a crown. He used to be a king. But he renounced that life to find true happiness, not the happiness of just feeding the mouth of your ego. And it's in that moment where the king is speechless, where that person, that smiling disciple that didn't stand up because he used to be a king. Do you know? He played that game before. He was literally head on the mountain more than the other king. And the sage says that now the smiling disciple has understood what true happiness is. The unconditional happiness. It's in happiness like being grateful that you are existing rather than not existing. And then it's like a gratefulness of, I would say, a sort of happiness that there is an opportunity. That means whatever outcome, whatever interpretation on the outcome, it's a living experience. The life of the world is really the ultimate commander. We are all peons of how we perceive the chessboard. It's very strange to try to fathom a movement of our species that is beyond behavior. Behavior is like the ceiling of how far we can worship. Beyond that, there is no worshiper. That means behavior is like an addiction of a multidimensional being. I wouldn't say that. I would say it's literally like you're in it's like you're in an Iron Man suit and you don't realize you're in an Iron Man suit. And it's like when something hits the Iron Man suit, you feel like you suffer. But you're not the Iron Man suit. You know? This is the same with the video game analogy, the life as a dream analogy, the simulation analogy. Pretty much either truth is in the room or it's not. If truth is in the room, we have to define that truth. We see we can't define a changing universe. Technically, it's dynamic. So that means there is no such thing as a static truth. It's not truth. It's not a conceptual anymore. A static conceptual truth can't exist. That means it is true. There may have been linguistic revelations in our history. But I am telling you, every existence is a revelation. Every day you wake up is a revelation. Every time you look in the mirror, it's a revelation. And so revelation is not limited to language. Language is just clothing for the mind. If the mind doesn't have the ability to be true. That means you can say anybody who believes something is because they have fear to actually see what they are. So you have no choice. You have to believe. If you don't care to know what your eyes are, it's as if why should others? You know, that means I want to see a day where there's teachers in the educational system. They're like, why should I teach you? Who are you? Do you know? And then the student would be like, whoa, who am I? Actually, that's a good question. You know, it's like, who am I? Why am I even in this school? Why am I even here? Why has my attention been piloted to this point where my plane of existence is? There's an incredible quote from Will Durant. He says, knowledge is the eye of desire and can become the pilot of the soul. As we move beyond behavior worship, we are for the first time going to come back to the unknown. It's going to be a collective experiential renaissance. So what does that mean? That means if we were an advanced civilization, we would have all these three dimensions. We would attain mastery in these three dimensions as a collective. That means we have to collectively be comfortable with all the way objects appear to us. That means, in the way, when I say comfortable, I mean we have to be comfortable with the material face of the universe. That means once we're comfortable with the objective universe, then we require a collective comfort with subjective universe. This is where you can say the freedom of speech comes from. This is psychological freedom, where now we don't experience, because there's still racism, all the isms, sexism, different people still are the mask of language on their face is so fixed that they feel it's like they can't be anything else. So we're living in a world right now. Just think, human beings are humans, and I would say, I wanted to say ridiculous ratio, but okay, let's say 37% of the population doesn't have boxes on its head. Okay? Imagine right now 37%, there's 37% of 8 billion. Okay, let's say 1/4 of 8 billion people are they don't have boxes of language on their head. So they're not ideal worshippers. That means there is 2 billion people on this planet that are wondering what to do beyond ideal worship. So they are left to be nothing else other than explorers. So after behavioral worship, it is back into unknown exploration. It's going to be one of the most coolest times. That means, I would say, who was it? I think it was Lance Armstrong. Let me double check. Oh, sorry, not Lance Armstrong. What was it? Neil Armstrong? Yeah, Neil Armstrong, okay? The first person to walk on the moon in the human history. So Neil Armstrong's father, when he was a child, actually saw the Wright brothers develop the airplane. And when he was an old man, he saw his son step on the moon. Can you imagine? Can you imagine in your childhood seeing the Wright brothers, and in your old age seeing your son step on the moon? And what's even more remarkable is they did that with the computers. Literally, our phones are way more advanced than the computers then. They did it with a less advanced phone, you know? And, it's like radio waves are honestly a blessing in this universe. So just like Neil Armstrong's father, who saw the Wright brothers and saw like his son step on the moon, I would say right now, we people who are alive in 2020, we are getting to see how there was savage objective living, where we were just an animal in a jungle, like, imagine. Then we came to gentle subjective living. From savage objective living, we came to gentle subjective living. And from gentle subjective living, now we're going back to the unknown, which means no opinion on nature, that which is already moving. So it would be a level of pure exploration, where you are looking at the universe as if it's a chess game, where the universe is making the chess move first, and then you're like, okay, what did nature just do? You know? That means, I'll tell you, it's really that you can follow yourself, you can follow your world. These are the two strings that consciousness can pull. If you follow yourself, you learn from a causal dimension. Brahman becomes your teacher. If you pull the string of the world, Shiva becomes your teacher. You learn from the effect position. If you see cause and effect simultaneously, that's when you go to Vishnu's abode. Vishnu is the maintainer. Technically, Vishnu, I would personally say, in my understanding of not just my own understanding, my true opinion on it, I feel Vishnu is Krishna's dream. But inside Vishnu, the dream is holding the content of the dream. So Vishnu is a level where you are not learning from creation and destruction anymore. It's as if been there, done that. Multidimensionally been there, done that. Eons and like lifetimes. You know, that there was this yogi, I remember in the Puranas reading, like there was this there was this yogi who had lived through 7,500 apocalypses. 7,500 apocalypses. You know, that is timeless technically. You can't fathom it. You know? It's like 7,500 abstract units. You know? It's like unfathomable. And I was like, wow. Some beings have it, you know? Some beings are really taking the long way. The being thinks, oh man, 7,500 apocalypses, you know, of incarnations. It's like, you know, gotta keep going. You know, and some people are like, oh my God. It's like, have you ever thought of asking in all those 7,500 incarnations, you know, 7,500 apocalyptic, you know. It's like, have you ever asked, who has been dying? Who has been born? Who is here now? And what was now before you were here? Once the pilot's calling is heard, you can't be a follower of objects. You can't be a follower of subjects. It's just the unknown and your direct living experience, and you'll realize that is the game of the gods. What do your eyes deserve? And if you are a force of life right now, how is it being navigated? How are you wielding your energetic existence as psychological experience? We have reached the time where collectively the species is ready to realize that we are all in the world but not of it. Therefore, a new domain of psychological development of relationships with unknown animate personality. That means there's no such thing as theosophy. It's just that the world, it was multidimensional from beginning. It's just that we forget and then we get fascinated. Imagine like you draw a painting and you forget you drew it, and you come and see it and you're like, oh my God, it's so perfect. You know? who drew this? Who drew this? Oh my God! It's like, and then you realize it was you. That right now my voice is like ink on a piece of paper, ink in the silence that the viewer's ears are interpreting. You know, there's a view where I've been holding this mindset for a while, where it's this view that you are here to be gifted. Literally every day you wake up, due to its opportunity potential, is rendered as a gift if you care. That means if you care for the content of your eyes, and there's no attachment or detachment to the coming and going of thoughts throughout the day, it's as if, what if the world is waiting? You know, so many people, you know, what if the world literally is waiting for an update? And it can only get updated by humans. That means if human beings don't care about civilization, it will fade out of our memory and we'll be like, oh my God, we thought we were good people. Where'd our civilization go? You know? And so that's the risk of living artificially in nature. It's a sort of banishment. It's a sort of multidimensional self-exile. That means I could say something interesting here. I could say that just like we went from idol worship to ideal worship to behavior worship, if we could see behavior worship to be like we are following behavior, technically it would be like we are fascinated by how the world is behaving in front of our eyes, and as we go forward in the space-time continuum, we will become more and more fascinated by the world behind our eyes. And that's really the intent behind the voice of the unknown. That you believed and you disbelieved, but there was always more. So when there's always more, there is the ego can't win. When the ego realizes, because there's always more and so much unknown, the ego can't win, the ego becomes a servant. So technically, that energy that was being used to make you into a sort of character in a story that was analyzing the moment, that energy doesn't move in that way. That energy that is used for psychological being, for ideological being, for your ideological, for your subjective existence, that energy is not used in that way. So first of all, you notice a totally different, you notice your presence, right? And so it becomes where, just like the human body, you know, when there's like a scar or something, a wound, the body heals itself. And I feel when there is an unnatural behavior done, nature corrects it. Nature is like a seed. It will grow the way it is. It is like planted, regardless of we thinking it's great or not. It's just that if we can build sky cities, and over time, this was my vision of Civilization 2.0 as a strategy to bypass extinction indefinitely. You see, because we are creatures that are defined by our environment, but if we live in the sky, if we don't live on this planet, for the first time, we will have a different karma than the planet. It's as if we separated our cause and effect movements with the causal and effect, like cause-effect movements of the planet to some degree, you know, with the surface of the planet. Therefore, the psychology has access to a different landscape. And so, it's very fascinating because there's people like Elon Musk who are go further, Elon, you Musk. But like he's work like there are people who are working on companies where they're trying to find how do they create that bridge of connecting human consciousness from the brain to actually the machine realm, right? So the thing here is that it is another way of saying we're trying to we're trying to live inside our imagination consciously. That's another way of saying like how cyberspace is going to become literally, it's not going to become our spirituality, it's going to become our digital spirit, our digital collective spirit. And it's a very hard call because sometimes I think about how would my life be if I had more information. Let's say you had access to all information right now. It's like you wouldn't live as a person anymore. You would just be a wind passing through an endless landscape of mind. Cyberspace landscape. So technically you would be a god of a world that exists inside you but never outside. Which is fascinating. Because it technically means it's a world inside a world inside a world. Imagine the first child, and it's going to be incredible. Imagine like children go inside this pod in the future, or not just children, anybody. But I was thinking like imagine a sci-fi context, like okay. Imagine, here's how cool. I'm gonna go the other way around here. I'll tell you this. Imagine you're born and you live a life, you get to like age 60 and something happens, you die. You suddenly wake up at the age 20 in a pod in the outer realms and you realize you were just a child that was born. It's as if you got to live twice. But it's just that actually when you were born in the outer realms, as a child, you were just put, imagine in a sci-fi context, into a pod with virtual reality cyberspace connected to your eyes. So the child never knew what reality was, but the child was always in reality. And so in 20 years of life, imagine in 20 years of life, we create a cyberspace simulation that is like 80 years of life. So that means, imagine, or I said 60, so imagine you lived 60 years of life, you wake up as a 20-year-old in the outer realms and it was all the cyberspace simulation. Do you know? So you would literally, like a cat has 9 lives, imagine you have 9 cyberspace simulation tries, you know? That would be an era of canine cyberspace, you know? That would be, we can even name it like, literally the letter K and the number 9. K9 cyberspace. K9 cyberspace landscape analysis, let's call it. We gotta create some puzzles for the future, you know. I feel if we were to prioritize what does a person want, I would say after they have, let's say your like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, your physiological needs are fulfilled, like shelter, food, water, temperature, sleep, and all that, right? It goes towards psychological needs. Maslow had this system on it's from sociology on society, how the individual should prioritize their values in society. So anyways, let's say you satisfied being an object. Then let's say you had the greatest friends and the greatest lovers and relationships and all of that, and all of that was perfect. The psychological needs were satisfied, like your subjective life was satisfied. Then you return to a point where what you felt was lacking is fulfilled, but what next? So what do you do when the cup gets full to the brim? You get a new cup. Evolution. The purpose of life is evolution. But not an evolution limited to form. I would say an evolution of the stillness of the universe, viewing how it has moved so far. Anyways, in the subtitle I've written what is going on with the human movement. That's pretty much it, that our movement is giving us definition, and if we have some method to see beyond our movement and to try to comprehend the human idea or the view from different angles, the human point of consciousness from different degrees, I would say pretty much wonder how everything is being everything, wonder how nothing is being nothing, then wonder if there never was everything, never was nothing, what would there be? And then at that point, probably you'll notice your experience. And that experience is so present, simple, and just being. It's that energy doesn't have problems, but a character and a story, it will. So this, honestly, what I was trying to say is that beyond behavioral truths, we will be left to recreate truth. That means we are evolving psychologically to become universal artists. That's the artist's view is the healthiest individual relationship with the unknown, because it is considering a value to sharing the inner realms. That means you can be responsible for the world that you see. Thank you for listening, and much blessing.